Hi there and welcome to the Alt.Narrative Podcast. I'm your empathetic and relentlessly curious host, Rich Harris. I've been a corporate marketer and sociology nerd for most of my 2 decades-long career, observing trends and patterns in human behavior on the internet. On this podcast, we will explore the impact of the digital world on humanity and modern-day social dynamics. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to check out the website at Alt.Narrative.com for more content. Welcome everyone to the Alt.Narrative Podcast. My name is Rich Harris and I'm your host, and today we have a very special guest, somebody that I have known for a really long time. This will be episode 11 of the podcast. My guest is Janet Fouts. I have known her for quite a long time, several years. I consider her to be not only just one of the coolest people I've ever met, but also, one of the OGs in social media, kind heart, an empath for sure, really cares about people, and also is kind of a tech head too, and appreciates technology and kind of the things that brings to the table. I'll let her speak in more detail about what she does, but she is definitely a natural born, listener. She really understands people and what they need, and she has spent a lot of her time, coaching leaders, helping to kind of build out some empathy basically into their leadership style and being more concerned about their employees' mental well-being and kind of the overall company dynamic. She's also done a bunch of other things, but instead of listening to me ramble on about her and do a horrible job describing how great she is, I'll let her do that herself. So Janet, welcome to the show.
Wow. I'm sitting here so humbled right now. Wow, that was amazing.
Well, you're amazing. So, you got to kick that off the right way.
Gosh. Yeah, we go back a long ways, back to the days when I was a digital marketer, when I was running a social media agency. I've been in marketing and technology for a very long time. And then one day I decided, yeah, I'm done with this. It's time for me to have real impact on real humans on a really deep level. And I really feel that you can't do that with digital marketing anymore. And so I shut down my agency and I launched a new company called Nearly Mindful. And at Nearly Mindful, I am the human potential facilitator, which is a really fun title to have.
Yeah. And why don't you explain maybe in detail what you focus on in that?
Basically, for me, it's about, what do you want to be like when you grow up? What do you want people to think of you? How do you want to be in this world? And my job is to help you get there. It's to help you really reach the potential that you have inside you, but you really haven't gotten there yet and you're not sure why.
And then who typically are some of your clients or the people that you speak to?
It's interesting. Some of them are people who are, C-level executives. Some of them are at Fortune 50 companies. Some of them are at little tiny startups. Some of my clients are actually VCs who bring their entrepreneurs in, people who are starting a startup. And I've worked with a lot of startups over the years. Mm-hmm. They don't always think about running a company. They think about the mission that brought them there. And that's not enough to run a company. And the VCs know that. So They bring me in to kind of work with a team and help them start to react together as a team, to really start to relate to each other where it's on a different level. They start to work together more than just create cool stuff together. And those are very different.
Right. So have you noticed too that there's been I've seen this a lot more on LinkedIn lately, and sometimes on LinkedIn it's hard to know, when you start seeing trends and articles showing up, different topics, get more popular and start trending and stuff like that. One thing that I'm really thankful for is that I've started to see, there's such an emphasis on bringing EQ into the fold and stop focusing on, like you said, making the cool stuff and selling it, because that's basically what companies have been built on, especially in Silicon Valley, which is my background. it's all about some kind of product or service, and then sales guys, and we're just like hitting numbers, and we're going to go public, and we're going to write books, and, do keynote speaking gigs and stuff like that. But what gets lost in all that is the attention to all the people that it takes to get those companies to that point, and then they end up losing their minds and themselves in that work. And so, have you noticed that there, as far as like people, especially in the leadership and the C-suite, are they starting to become more open-minded about kind of thinking about those things and considering those things?
Yeah, I'm hearing that at a lot of different levels, especially now with COVID, and there's all of these changes in how the company structure is working. There's a lot more fluidity in the company now, but it's really fun to kind of watch those top-down managers who didn't have a whole lot of EQ, that were really just dictatorial. They're not working much anymore. They're starting to find that people don't want to work with them. People are walking away from companies because they don't want to work with that style of management. That old school, do it because I told you, is just not cutting it anymore. And, here in Silicon Valley, it definitely isn't. But the other really interesting thing is that work until I drop mentality is also not out there as much as it used to be. It used to be that you would do a 24-hour day and not really think a lot about it. It would just be, I'm going to be really shot by the weekend, but I'm going to power through this. But people are starting to have that EQ to realize that they're just not successful when they push through like that. When we overtax our brains, when we don't take a break, when we don't take a pause, and we're not organized in how we do things, there's going to be a lot of failures. There's going to be a lot of redoing, especially things that are technical. I was working with an engineer who said that he really was having a problem with his team once they went remote, because he didn't believe they were working. And there was this layer of trust that was missing. And it was really hard for him to regain that, even though he had the numbers to show what they were doing, what they were producing, and it was working. He just didn't trust them. And so we had to go through this whole process of bringing the team together and, helping people understand where everybody was coming from and get it all out in the air so that it could be discussed and we could work through it. And it was really effective, but it blew him away because he really just thought that was all he had to do, was tell people what to do and they would do it. And, but he still didn't trust them to do it.
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing, there's a couple of things like variables in there that make that complicated. One is how somebody, was raised, when it comes to work. They're going to grow up and turn into an adult. And if they haven't really examined some of those maybe more destructive patterns that they had experienced growing up, my dad was a U.S. Marine and, fought in Vietnam, and God bless him, he's not here anymore. But like, I remember as a kid, he had a lot of challenges trying to connect with us on an empathetic level, because everything was just about like, get this shit done, get it done. No one's crying, nobody bitch, just get it done. Don't complain about anything. Everybody helps until it all gets completed, which I believe in. However, there's this rigidity and this kind of old school, like tough guy syndrome that is just, it's inherent in just the history of like family cultures, here in America, and a lot of other countries have this too. And I'm really glad to see that going away. But when I turned into an adult, I remember, going into work and starting my career. And if I saw that anybody was having a hard time at work emotionally or whatever, my gut reaction, which was programmed into me, was like, oh, you really need to, that whole pull up your bootstraps bullshit, and it's like, that is horrible. Like, why should I, and why would I treat anybody like that? I certainly wouldn't want to tell my kids to treat other people like that, and I don't treat them like that, So eventually over time, I learned how to just change my entire kind of construct and how I perceive human beings when they're going through things. And then I also realized later through that process, how much mental health was an issue for my father, and how I also need to have more empathy for that in general, which totally changed the game for me. And so now when I think about people, I really take that stuff seriously. And as somebody who's struggled through COVID and some unemployment and just other issues throughout my career too, with mental health, depression, isolation, anxiety, and stuff like that, that just kind of comes out of nowhere, I just really feel for people. And I really feel like we need to, and we are now on the cusp of developing new work cultures and work lives that are centered around a whole new idea about what work looks like, and being at work or doing work and feeling accomplished. And leadership styles are changing. There's a lot more empathy involved, but it's a challenge. So you got how you were raised, you're bringing that in, and then you got a company culture. So if how you were raised was to not really have empathy, and then the leadership of the company you're working for doesn't really care about that stuff, it can make for an extremely toxic, horrible work environment, and then they kind of just dangle this paycheck over your head all the time, and super harmful and degrading, especially over the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is something that is having a little bit of a backlash now too. And I've seen a lot more leadership over the last year and a half, or really 2 or 3 years, that's coming from the middle of the company. If the leadership is not stepping up, and then they're not recognizing the benefits of bringing empathy and particularly compassion into the workforce, then people from lower in the company are picking that ball up. And I think, in a lot of cases, that was the mid-level managers who would kind of field the ball and hold it underneath the leader, because, okay, he's kind of a jerk, but we have to do what he says, but come to me with your issues and I'll help you work through it. Those are the people that are becoming the CXOs now.
Finally. Yeah. Finally, it's before, to your point, those middle managers were the younger managers, and they were almost having to take the role of the kind of codependent parent in the relationship, running interference for the children, if you will, and it's don't worry, I know dad's really crazy and mad and harsh, but here's how we're going to do this, and bring some nurturing to the table. But thank goodness those people are now up at the C levels, so that their vibe and their approach to management and leadership can start trickling down from the get-go, out of the gate, and it becomes part of the culture instead. And that in tech, I can definitely say that as somebody who's an empath and a creative, I've been starving to see more of that in my industry, because it was not a common thing for at least a couple decades.
Yeah, absolutely true. And, it's that kind of age-old question that, people ask all the time. Okay, tell me a story about a manager that you had that you really loved working for. It's never that asshole. It's always the person that actually asked you how you were and wanted to hear the answer before they went on to, you need to do this. And that empathy, and as I said, compassion, okay, we have all these people. Apple just announced they're not coming back into the office in the near future. So, okay, how are you taking care of those people? Because people are really struggling. And some companies, like HP has a great program. They've got great support. Salesforce has great support for their employees to try to help them manage through this crisis. And whether we think COVID is true or not, it's still a crisis. This is a pandemic. It's still a crisis across the board. And people are burned out. They're stressed. They're having all kinds of issues that their managers aren't seeing because it's happening in our homes. And there has to be a plan in place to reach out to people. I worked for a company the other day that really just had me come in at their all hands. And I did a little meditation. I did a little bit, okay, here's how you can take care of yourself at home. And it went over really well. And it was a huge company that surprised me because it was a Korean company, and they don't really support people working from home at all, but they had to.
Mhm.
And so their disruption was insane. And it was very hard. But they were trying, to find a way to help their employees manage through the stress.
Yeah. And that, I think we're definitely seeing a lot of those changes too, more on like the worldwide level, not just the United States, not just in Silicon Valley, but kind of everywhere. And I think what the effect of the pandemic has had on the workplace too is it kind of hit the pause button on everybody's life. And all of a sudden, like, I'm starting to read articles about how some people are giving up jobs that they've spent, 20 years trying to get to, after college and stuff. Cause they're like, I paused it, cause of all this COVID stuff. All of a sudden I'm at home more. I got a fuzzy dog on my lap more. I'm putting more time in with my kids. I'm also kind of more annoyed with my dog and my kids sometimes, but at the same time, like, all of these kind of tangible organic items that they didn't see that often because they were at work dealing with just work stuff and work environment and meetings and bosses and stuff like that. They were almost kind of reminded how important that was to them and how good and natural it felt and why we need to have more of that in our lives, even though we're employed and working really hard. So um, I've also heard of, my wife works for a giant company too, and they take it very seriously, all the mental health stuff. And they even have like meetings every couple of weeks to just kind of talk about your feelings, like who, who thought that was ever going to happen, but here we are. And it's great because people aren't as burnt out as a result. They feel tended to. They don't feel like that they have, a barcode tattooed on the back of their neck. And, they're just another like number walking into some like Gattaca, basically, the movie. So at least they're not really doing that anymore. And so that's really nice to see. I did want to check with you too on like, are there other like technological tools that you have seen being used in a way that are intended to kind of help facilitate talking more about mental health stuff, or like help kind of eschew, new habits at work that take into consideration, people's livelihood and how they're feeling and what kind of headspace they're in?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because I moderated a talk the other day on Clubhouse for a company, and they just had a team come together and just talk on Clubhouse. It was a private room, wasn't, open to the public, but it allowed them to just have a conversation, and it wasn't on Zoom. They didn't have to feel like they were on video or that anybody was watching. People were all over the place. Some of them were at the park, and that was okay too. But it was really to have those conversations and, just opening that door and allowing people to have those conversations, and to say, okay, what are you stressing about most right now? And it was really interesting to see the answers, because some of them obviously were challenges at work or not having the equipment that they needed at home. People are still like, I got this dog and, it's driving me crazy in the middle of what I'm trying to do. And everybody else is working on the computers and I don't have bandwidth. So there's all of those kind of issues too, which really haven't gone away. I kind of thought in a year and a half we would have solved that, but no. So, it's really interesting to see that we're all basically having the same human challenges, no matter where we're working or what we're doing. And it's got to be recognized.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got to be an opportunity for a company or a manager or just a coworker to say, okay, I hear you. And I hear that you're struggling with that. And I might have an answer and I might not. I might be able to refer you to somebody who has an answer. If you're really struggling, here's a phone number for a helpline. Those things are really important, and they're not getting out there as much as I would like them to, because people don't realize how much trauma they're under right now. We're all on a level of PTSD.
Yeah, totally. And, the other thing that is not necessarily being considered, while you're working is, yes, there's a lot of development in improving kind of the acknowledgement of mental health at work and inside company cultures and stuff like that. But the other thing feeding that kind of monster that's stressing us all out is what we're doing on social media outside of work. So So recently, I have a couple podcast episodes where I had read some interesting articles on social media and mental health, as well as social media and depression. And basically, there's another thing that happened that hit me like a ton of bricks, during COVID when I was unemployed, where basically the isolation and the depression that I didn't really know was inside me started to bubble up to the top, because as somebody who was unemployed, I was watching everybody's highlights, So here I am struggling financially. Here I am like trying to find work. All these companies froze all of their recs. They're totally uncertain as to like where everything's going to head, and so they just kind of stopped everything. So even though there's jobs floating around out there, they weren't really doing anything about it, And so you're sitting there, you're feverishly applying for jobs, and if you're not having any luck, at least once a week you have 10 friends going to Hawaii having a great time, or somebody's at some bougie restaurant eating some like $8 million steak or whatever, followed by like a really nice night out, or 4 nights out, or whatever. And normally I was able to just kind of go, oh, cool, I'm really happy for them, but over time that really starts to beat the crap out of you, and then all the good stuff and all kind of this like optimistic, I support everybody around me thing starts to go away. And then the depression thing and kind of creeps up out of nowhere. And so you have that going on along with, if you have a negative work environment that's not acknowledging your mental health, like it's kind of this double whammy, and it's super difficult to sort through that stuff.
Absolutely. And you know what else? It's really hard to get help with that. If you don't have a support network around you, it can be very difficult, because a lot of people they're not willing or not financially able to go get a therapist, to go get the help they need. And there are really great, 7 Cups of Tea is a really great website that, you can go and you can talk to people who are just going to listen to you. There's those places like that you can go, that you don't have to spend a ton of money, but you can be heard and you can get some of this out, and you can start to figure out how you're going to take care of yourself. But there are a lot of people that have really not dealt with it well, and it's showing up in different places. I talked to an HR manager the other day, and she said, my life right now is a living hell, because we don't have these jobs, we have those jobs, and nobody wants those jobs, and everybody left. They moved to Idaho or whatever. And now I'm having to try to bring people in-house, and they all hate me, and let's just give HR a little bit of love right now.
Yeah. Seriously, I can't even imagine the onslaught of applicants. The other thing that I've heard too from other recruiters is that there's all these jobs floating around up there that nobody's getting, because if you're young, a lot of the younger folks, they're actually asking for way more money than they used to now for some of these jobs. And then you have people like me, and with my level of experience, which is basically like, director level or above, and they won't hire people like me because we're overqualified. So you end up in this weird situation where you have all these like jobs floating around, and they're just sitting there waiting for the taking, but there's nobody like getting hired for them or anything like that, And so it's, when you're unemployed and you're stressed out about that stuff, it can definitely take a toll on you. And then when you're on social media, you have what you have to be to find work, and make sure you're like always trying to front load. For me, I was freelancing, like front load some other work and stuff. I'm seeing how like stable everybody else is, and yes, exactly, the perceived stability that everybody else has. I mean, we already know that, you can be a bazillionaire and be totally miserable, so, but in your mind, all these voices that we all have, these internal voices, they tell us these things, these false realities it's just bullshit, but it's hard to not believe them once you've been kind of fatigued over time from like a certain environment, and so, and it's tough. Yeah.
And it really is. I call it PTS, not PTSD, because I kind of have a problem with the D. It's not a disorder. It's not. It's just trauma.
It's just being a human being, basically. Yeah, it's the natural, organic result of an environmental situation, so I agree. Anyhow, cool. Well, I really appreciate your time today. Nice to talk. We really need to get back together again soon, at an actual restaurant like we did last time, and actually have a drink or have some food and just kind of shoot the shit. I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate you coming on here.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's always great to talk to you. And yes, let's plan on getting together soon.
That wraps it up for today's Alt.Narrative podcast episode. Thank you for listening, and please check us out online at altnarrative.com for more content.